Turn now to our next reading of Scripture, coming from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 25 through 33. Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether or not he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he's laid a foundation, then he's not able to finish. All who see it will ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and wasn't able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he's able, with 10,000, to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So, therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God. Well, dang it, Jesus. Again with the possessions thing, right? Haven't we talked enough about uncomfortable stuff lately? Well, all right. Well, some of that was my fault, wasn't it? Jesus wasn't really talking about the whole Israel and Palestine thing. Last week, Jesus was talking about how to party like a Christian at a wedding banquet. Not this week, though. Jesus comes straight at us with some very uncomfortable stuff. I didn't have to do anything to make it uncomfortable today. Hate? He says hate? Hate your father and mother? Hate your wife and children? Hate your brothers and sisters? Even life itself? Hate? How is that carrying the cross and following Jesus? What does that have to do with anything of the rest of the story? Anything else that he said? Hate, as we know, gets us nowhere. Gets us absolutely nowhere. It's like in that song, you're just chasing after nothing. All right? It's getting nowhere as we insist on hating one another. Name one example to me. Name one. Go ahead and shout it out if you can think of it. Name one example of hate being a good thing. But before you do, don't you go quoting scriptures at me now. I know that the Apostle Paul said something about hate what is evil and cling to what is good. I know the prophet Amos said hate what is evil and love what is good. So don't go quoting those scriptures to me. I just want you to give me one good example of hate for another human being. All right? Hate for another human being being a good thing, no matter who they are. All right, 1, 2, 3, go. He said Mount Vernon. All right, well, I wasn't expecting that. I don't have a place for that in the message today. But there's a reason why we have a funny answer and not a whole lot of real answers sprouting up. Because we might have some answers coming to mind, but we might be a little hesitant to say them because of whether or not it's really a good thing to hate another person. Is it the Jesus thing to do to hate Hitler? Is it the Jesus thing to do to hate a terrorist? Is it the Jesus thing to do to hate a mass murderer? Or how about the person in your life who hurt you and traumatized you more than anything else? Is it okay to hate that person? When is it really okay to hate? One example of it really being a good thing to hate another person. Just one. We may do it, right? We aren't strangers to the concept of hating other people. That doesn't make it good or productive or healing. It doesn't make the world any better. On contrast, it adds one more hateful person to the world. So as murky as all that is by itself, whether it's okay to hate somebody who's really hurt you, as murky as that is, Jesus isn't even on about that. He's saying, hate the ones who you love the most, and hate even life itself. Having trouble getting on board with this one, Jesus, just being honest. All of a sudden, giving up our possessions doesn't seem so drastic. So I'm thinking about this. There's a place in Gospel of Matthew. Jesus taught us not to be angry with each other. He said, do not be angry with your brother, and he says brother as in brother and sister in the faith, a fellow Christian. He's talking about church division. When you have division in the church, don't hold on to your anger towards one another. Reconcile with your brother or sister before you enter a space of worship and you approach the altar so that you may approach God with a clean heart. Don't hold on to your anger, as he says in Gospel of Matthew. And now here in the Gospel of Luke, we're supposed to hate. How are we supposed to embrace this? How do we even accept it? The Gospel of Mark actually has a toned-down version of this lesson. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus makes it very clear that his family are only those who do the will of God. He said something about his brothers and sisters and his mother, and he says, no, my brothers and sisters and my mother are only those who do the will of God. So it's the same lesson. Let go, in a sense, of what matters most to you in this world and put the will of God in its place. All right? Mom and Dad, sorry, you're not my mom and dad anymore unless you're doing the will of God. I mean, still uncomfortable, right? But, it's the same message. It's a little more palatable, though. He's not talking about hating them. Here in Luke, Jesus is saying to hate those who matter most to you in this world and even life itself. Meanwhile, Jesus doesn't even become hateful when he's being beaten and strung up on a cross. On the other side of that, he's asking God to forgive the people perpetrating that violence. All that's taken place leading up to this passage this morning and Jesus' story, the journey thus far, we've already seen clearly Jesus doesn't have a hateful bone in his body. So what do we do with this? I get the idea. The idea is letting anything in this world even compare to how you feel about the will of God, it inevitably weakens the impact of the gospel. All right, it dampens the sound that the gospel can make. It dims the light that the gospel shines if we're not putting it first. The true power of the gospel, it doesn't typically come from a halfway Christian or like a lukewarm Christian, as they're called in Revelation. It's usually, we find that life-changing and world-changing stuff only from those Christians who are just all in, who are passionate about showing love, who are just putting it all on the table to help others and help the world. Those seem to be the ones who change the world most. So yeah, okay, fair enough. Put the will of God first and let nothing compare to its place. But why take it to such an extreme? If I'm supposed to hate some of the most beautiful people and wonderful things in my life. I'm supposed to hate life itself. Life is a precious gift from God. I'm supposed to be thankful for life, and now I'm supposed to hate it. Why are we being so extreme about this? Putting God's will is one thing, putting God's will first, but hating the rest? I'm just asking the same question over and over again. To try to get this, only thing we can really do is to follow Jesus into his parable. What builder doesn't sit down and figure out what they need to finish the tower that they want to build? If we were to start this big project and run out of materials and leave it unfinished, the town would make fun of us, right? We'd be humiliated. What king doesn't sit down and think about the outcome before going into battle? If one king has a smaller army than the other king, he knows he better send out a request for peace, or otherwise this whole battle is going to be the death of his kingdom and probably himself too. Simple stuff, right? All right, so we're thinking about preparations and outcomes. Needs and outcomes, what you do to prepare for what you want to see in the end. We prepare and act accordingly to achieve the desired outcome. Therefore, Jesus says, give up your possessions. Think about the outcome. Be prepared. Give them up. Let them go. Put the gospel in their place. This whole thing is really about possession. So we should be looking at the whole passage through the lens of possessions and giving them up. Think of the one possession that means most to you in this world. Shout it out if it comes right up. What possession means most to you in this world? Your family? Is that a possession? Oh, it's a tough question, right? Yeah. I had trouble choosing mine as an example. What's your most prized possession? It's a complicated question. Do we include family? They're not really possession. How about pets? Pets are kind of technically their possession, but in real life they're more like family. Our homes and cars. So yeah, it's the car, transportation. A matter of function. Right? How do we live in today's society, especially in this part of the country, without transportation? So we need it. It's much more important to us because it's something we need for everything else, not because of sentimental value. To make it easier on myself, I asked Megan what her most prized possession is. No, she didn't say me. But actually, she ran into the same problem because, it's this because of that. It's this because of that. And, as far as sentimental value, she said her wedding ring. So I guess she kind of said me, right? A good answer. But then, as far as function, she said her car. Pretty much everything else shuts down without her car. So she's got to have that. So it's kind of, what's really my most prized possession. Jesus today in this passage, he's using hyperbole to help us come to terms with how much all these things really mean to us. Jesus, using hyperbole, he helps us understand this a little bit. He said, if you want to be my follower, you have to love God's will so much that you hate your wedding rings and you hate your cars and your houses and those things that mean everything to you for one reason or another. Maybe it's sentimental, maybe it's necessity, whatever. Those things that mean so much to you, you love God's will so much that it's as if you hate all the other stuff. This hate language is so strong and off-putting, it can only be hyperbole. All right, if you don't know that word yet, hyperbole, it's a way of, as you see in the picture, it's a way of describing something in an extreme, kind of far-out way that's not, something we know from reality. But it's a way that you get the idea. My feet are killing me. They're not actually killing me, but they hurt really, really, really bad. And that's a way that I can get that emphasis across. Remember Jesus saying that the prayers of the faithful move mountains. It's hyperbole. And so is this. Of course, if you're bent on taking everything literally, then you're going to have a harder time dealing with some of this stuff. I don't know what you're going to do with this hate passage if you're trying to take it literally. Jesus uses this hyperbole, this power in his speaking and his teaching to get our attention. To see how much we really love God's will and how much we really care about accomplishing it. And then Jesus goes into the parables to explain why this question is so important. And the parables remind me of a small road we once took on a family trip from Colorado. We wanted to take a quicker way, so we took this little small road that went through Kansas. But it was one of those small roads where there's not a gas station for 100 miles. So if you're going to take this road, you better be ready to take this road, or else you're going to run out of gas. You're going to end up on the side of the road. If you don't start out by sitting down and reflecting upon what you're going to need for this journey, you're going to fail, and you're going to make a mockery of it just because you didn't stop and think it through. Clinging to anything in this world can get in the way of what God is working on. It can lead us astray and slow down or even stop God's will in its tracks. halfway Christians, lukewarm Christians. Those of us are kind of warm, not really hot for Jesus, but kind of warm for Jesus. It's those of us who set the biggest roadblocks in front of fellow Christians and set bad examples. Put the biggest stops in the way of God's will. Lead people astray. Here today, as big crowds are now following Jesus, what he's saying is the followers that he really wants out of this gigantic crowd are the followers who are going to be like Stephen. A little later in the story, in the book of Acts, you find the apostle Stephen, one of the early apostles, who was a man full of faith and full of Holy Spirit, full of grace and full of power. And he found himself falsely accused and in danger, and he refused to let go of the gospel. He clung to the gospel while he was facing death. While he clung to the gospel, he faced ridicule. He faced death. At best, he might face a jail sentence, right? But no matter, just pretty much any way it's going to go, it's as if he chose God's will in a way that says, I hate everything else. He was so passionate about choosing God's will, it was like, I can let go of all these people and all this stuff that means so much to me because I have to do the right thing. And so he kept preaching, and then he prayed for those who were about to attack him. And actually, while he was being attacked, he prayed for their forgiveness, and then he suffered the same fate as Jesus, clinging to the gospel all the way. This is the kind of believer Jesus is saying that he wants. That we love God's will so much, it's as if we hate everything else. May we not actually hate anyone, though. But may we be prepared to cling to God's will as if it's the only thing that matters. And may we be prepared to see this journey through all the way to the accomplishment of God's kingdom.